The broadcast was normal. That's what we have to remember. It was just another Friday night, another episode of SmackDown, moving the pieces around the board. A mid-card champion was talking, the crowd was lukewarm, and the commentators were reading their prepared lines about the next pay-per-view. It was routine. And in the world of professional wrestling, routine is a fragile, fragile thing. It wasn't a sound that started it. It was the lack of one. The champion's microphone suddenly cut out. The arena lights snapped to black, plunging 20,000 people into a confused darkness. A collective nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. A technical glitch, surely. A blown fuse. Someone in the truck leaning on the wrong button. The commentators' headsets went dead. The Titantron, just seconds ago blazing with colorful graphics, was a void. This wasn't a glitch. This was a shutdown. In that pitch black, a new sound emerged. Not music, not a voice, just a low, resonant hum. A bass note that you felt in your chest before you heard with your ears. The silence had lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then a single, sharp, white spotlight hit the center of the entrance ramp. There was no smoke, no pyrotechnics, no grand announcement, just the light, the hum, and a figure standing within it. The entire arena held its breath, trying to make out the silhouette. It wasn't the champion. It wasn't anyone on the current roster. The figure was tall, broad, and hauntingly still. He just stood there. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't point to the sky. He just was. And then he began to walk. The camera zoomed in, the arena's silence finally breaking, replaced by a sound that wasn't a cheer or a boo. It was a roar of pure, undiluted disbelief. After months of absolute silence, after vanishing from the face of the earth following the greatest loss of his career, after the empire he built was dismantled and his family fractured, Roman Reigns was here. He wasn't wearing the opulent red ula fala of the tribal chief. He wasn't flanked by his council or his enforcers. He wore a simple black hoodie, the hood drawn up, casting his face in shadow. He looked thinner, not weaker, but honed. Like a man who had burned away everything that wasn't essential. The chaos that the headlines described wasn't people jumping the rails. It was an emotional detonation. People were standing, hands on their heads. Phones were out, but many weren't even recording. They were just frozen, trying to process the impossible. He walked down the ramp, not with the dominant swagger of a king, but with the quiet, deliberate pace of a man walking into the eye of his own storm. He stepped through the ropes, into the center of the ring, and the spotlight followed him. The hum stopped, and the arena was filled only with the sound of its own shock. In that glowing, cramped space just behind the curtain, known as the gorilla position, the routine of the night evaporated. The show's producer, a headset clamped to his skull, was frozen, his rundown sheet, the meticulously planned script for the entire 2-hour broadcast, now just useless paper in his hand. He wasn't yelling at the camera operators, he wasn't calling for the next segment. He was just staring, mute, at the main monitor. Standing next to him was the man Roman Reigns had lost his championship to, the man who had finished his story. The new face of the company. The champion was supposed to go out last, to send the crowd home happy. He was in his full ring gear, ready. But the look on his face wasn't anger. It was something far more complex. He watched the monitor as Roman walked, and in that moment, he wasn't the champion. He was just a man seeing a ghost. His new era, his hard-won peace, had just been violated. This wasn't on the script. This wasn't authorized. The ripple effect was immediate. Wrestlers who were getting changed in the locker room or catering or the trainer's room suddenly flooded the hallway, their own matches and interviews forgotten. They crowded around the monitors, a silent, stunned audience of the world's toughest athletes, all watching one man render their entire reality obsolete. When the commercial break finally hit, the director screaming into the void for something to happen, Roman Reigns turned, walked back through the ropes, and disappeared behind the curtain. The atmosphere he walked into was not one of reunion. It was thick, toxic, and silent. The hallway full of wrestlers parted like the Red Sea. No one clapped him on the back. No one said, "Welcome home." They just stared, their eyes wide with 1,000 questions. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my spot? The new hierarchy, the locker room leaders who had stepped up in his absence, suddenly felt their authority drain away. They were just placeholders. The real boss was back. But the most terrifying reaction came from his own blood. The remnants of his family, the men who had tried to carry his banner, were huddled in their private locker room. They hadn't gone out to greet him. They were watching their own TV, and when the feed cut, the look they shared was one of pure, unadulterated fear. They hadn't been running the Bloodline. They had been keeping it warm, and the true owner had just returned to find his throne occupied. The paranoia began instantly. Who knew? Who helped him? The trust that holds a locker room together shattered in an instant. Thousands of miles away, in the glass towers of WWE headquarters, the C-suite was in chaos. Phones were ringing off the hook, vibrating on polished mahogany desks. This was not a planned marketing beat. This was not a surprise return that had been carefully focus grouped and leaked to the right journalists. This was an avalanche. The TKO executives, the new corporate ownership, the men who deal in stock prices and broadcast rights, were demanding answers. Who sanctioned this? What is the narrative? How does this affect the long-term booking we just approved? The network liaisons were frantic. The broadcast partners were furious that a moment of this magnitude had happened without their knowledge. Their own ad sales teams left scrambling. The legal department was already drafting statements, trying to get ahead of a story they didn't understand. And in the center of it all, the social media team. A 20-something-year-old intern who had been scheduling posts about T-shirt sales suddenly found themselves in control of the company's voice. They posted a simple 7-second clip. Just the walk, just the hood. The words, "He's here." In 60 seconds, it became the most viewed, most liked, most shared video in the company's history. The machine, for all its power and planning, had lost control. The narrative wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to him. The moment the clip hit the internet, the world stopped arguing about everything else. It was a digital ceasefire. Sports journalism websites, which usually buried wrestling news, had it as their lead story. The Roman Empire strikes back. The return that stopped the industry. Podcast hosts, who had just recorded their weekly analysis, were deleting their files and starting over. The speculation wasn't just, who will he fight? It was deeper. It was concerned. The man in the hoodie didn't look like the head of the table. He looked hollowed out. The narrative immediately shifted from fantasy booking to something more human. Why did he come back? Is he okay? He didn't look triumphant. He looked haunted. The chaos he'd created wasn't just in the arena, it was in the perception of his own character. For years he had been the invincible, arrogant, final boss. But the man who returned was vulnerable. He was a puzzle. The silence of his entrance forced the world to fill it with their own fears and theories. He hadn't just returned to wrestling, he had returned to the global consciousness, and in doing so, he had proven that he was, and always had been, the true needle mover. The entire industry, from competitors to media, was now forced to react to him. Let's imagine for a moment Paul Heyman, the wise man, the special counsel, the one who had been the voice of the tribal chief for over 3 years. Where was he? He was not backstage. He was not in Stamford. He was, for all intents and purposes, in exile. He was at home, perhaps watching the show on his laptop, a glass of water untouched on his desk. When Roman's hooded figure appeared, Heyman wouldn't have felt joy. He would have felt a cold dread. This wasn't his Roman. This wasn't the man he had carefully molded and advised. This was a man acting purely on instinct, a man who had cut himself off from his own council. This was a rogue element. Heyman knew what this meant. His own relevance was now in question. He had been cast aside, and this return meant one of two things. Roman was returning for his wise man, or he was returning to erase him. Then there is Solo Sikoa, the enforcer, the one who took control. In that moment, Roman appeared. Solo's entire reign of terror, his takeover of the Bloodline, was exposed as a childish game. He was just playing dress-up in his older brother's suit. The fear in Solo's eyes wouldn't be for his own safety. It would be the fear of disappointing the only man he truly answered to. He had failed to hold the fortress, and the true king had just walked past the broken gates. What drove him back? What pulls a man who has achieved everything, money, fame, a historic championship reign, back to the place of his greatest failure? It wasn't the title. He hadn't even glanced at the new champion. It wasn't for the money. He was set for life. It was the silence. For months, he had been gone, living as a man, not a monument. But the pressure of the Anoa'i dynasty is not something you can retire from. The legacy of his family, The Rock, Yokozuna, his father Sika, it is a weight that demands to be carried. Perhaps the silence of normal life was deafening. The head of the table wasn't just a character, it was an armor, and without it, he was exposed. The kingdom he ruled was brutal, but it was his. The adulation, the hatred, the acknowledgement, it was a life force. Without it, he was just a man who had lost. The return wasn't a power play. It was an act of survival. He didn't come back to reclaim his throne. He came back because the throne was a part of him. He was a king who had discovered that his kingdom was not the ring, but the need to be in it. He needed the chaos to feel stable. He needed the pressure to breathe. Let's go back to the ring. The chaos has subsided. The 20,000 people are no longer screaming. They are just watching, waiting. Roman Reigns is still in the center of the ring. He hasn't moved. A producer, finally getting a coherent thought, slides a microphone into the ring. It lies at his feet. The entire global broadcast is focused on this one silent image. A man, a microphone, and an ocean of expectation. He's been in the ring for 3 minutes. In television time, that is an eternity. The network is screaming for the show to go to commercial, but the director in the truck holds firm. This is history. This is lightning in a bottle. Roman slowly bends down, his face still hidden by the shadow of the hood. He picks up the microphone. He brings it to his lips. The entire arena leans in. The silence is absolute. Every fan, every wrestler in the back, every executive in Stamford is waiting for the one word that will define the future. Acknowledge me. Wreck everyone and leave. My family. Just one word. He holds the mic to his mouth, and then, slowly, he lowers it. He lets it fall from his hand, thudding onto the mat. He turns his back to the main camera and just walks away. He leaves the ring, walks up the ramp, and disappears into the blackness he came from. The show ended in static and confusion. The commentators had no words. The fans filed out, not in anger, but in a state of profound, philosophical shock. What was that? It wasn't a return. It was an apparition. The headlines the next day were not, "Roman Reigns is back." They were, "What just happened?" The twist, the true meaning of the return, was not revealed until days later. A small, grainy cell phone video surfaced, taken by a fan in the front row. It was a different angle, zoomed in on Roman's face in the split second he picked up the mic. The hood had fallen back just enough, and the man who had ruled the entire industry with an iron fist, the most dominant champion of the modern era, had tears streaming down his face. He wasn't there to challenge anyone. He wasn't there to reclaim his family. He was a man utterly broken by his loss, by the silence. He hadn't returned to the arena to make a statement. He had returned to the only place he knew how to feel. He needed to stand in that ring to feel the eyes of the world, just to remember who he was. The shock wasn't that he was back. The shock was that the tribal chief was gone. All that was left was the man. And he was completely and totally lost.